Hello, everyone. I'm Raj Kumar, President and Editor-in-Chief of Devex, and just delighted to be back with everybody who's following along these conversations I've been having the last year or so. And today with my friend Akhtar Badshah, who I think many of you know, certainly know of you, Akhtar, if they don't know you personally, from the many hats you've worn over the years, and particularly your leadership of Microsoft's philanthropy. You led the Microsoft corporate giving, the CSR unit of the company for many years. And obviously, Microsoft is the world's biggest company, or second or third. It's one of the largest companies. It varies depending on the day, and has built one of the largest corporate philanthropies in history. And you now have a book out. As you can see, we were just laughing that your book is very visible behind you. I need a few more copies of mine, casually thrown over my shoulder. But we want to talk about your book, what you've learned, because you're in this moment of reflection, thinking back on your time at Microsoft. You've interviewed a number of people there, including Bill Gates and Satya Nadella and Brad Smith and others. And so we just really want to get into this question of what have you learned at Microsoft and beyond? What does it mean for corporate giving? What is this purpose mindset you're pushing forward today, Akhtar? So nice to get a few moments with you.
Thank you very much, Raj, and I'm so delighted to be here and chat with you. And again, I mean, your book is just absolutely phenomenal. It's such a terrific read. So if people have not read it, please go read it if you want to learn about the developing world and the international development sector. Just such a great story.
Thank you. That's so nice of you to say. But let's dive into yours today. I want to talk about your book and what you've learned. I mean, first of all, maybe we just start there. This idea of a purpose mindset, and you're juxtaposing it in your book against or along with the concept of a growth mindset, which a lot of people in Silicon Valley and the business world talk about, right? The sense that you have to bring a sense of growth to running a business or running a nonprofit, and you're adding a layer to that around purpose. What does it mean for you? Take us through.
Yeah. So, and for the Devex community, right? I mean, all of us kind of gravitate towards big issues, right? Climate change, poverty alleviation. Now we have kind of been trapped in this surreal world of this COVID pandemic world where we've kind of trained to do work in a different way. So as humanity, we kind of rise up to these external challenges and say how we come together to do good. But we really, very rarely spend time focusing on our own self, right? And from the perspective of saying, what is it that drives me? What are the value systems that I have? And purpose is that added layer on top of growth that allows you to discover that. It's not about discovery, it's really about cultivation and activation, because we all have a purpose in life. It's just that our work, suppresses it. It doesn't allow it to rise up in the same level. And when it rises up, it's actually about these big mega issues, not about some of the things that you deeply care about. So when you look at growth and the work that Carol Dweck did, I mean, she kind of talks about, hey, you have to move from a fixed mindset into a growth mindset, because growth mindset leads to individual growth, which then leads to your business growth. And business doesn't just have to be corporate, right? It's politics or academia or the work that you do. And then it comes back to you in your own growth, right? So it creates this duality, this yin and yang, and it's this constant learning cycle that we are in. I am saying that in today's world, we need to kind of go beyond that focus on the me to the focus on the we. And the we, if you introduce the we into the equation, now you're actually creating a trinity. The trinity is my development, which leads to business development or work development, which leads to community impact, which comes back to me as my personal growth and goes back into the workplace growth. And if you can kind of do that, now you're kind of creating this virtuous cycle that moves the focus from just self-growth and self-growth for what? So that's how I distinguish purpose mindset. And I kind of saw Microsoft creating this opportunity through its philanthropy program very early on in the company's life. In 1985, to kind of give this opportunity to individuals to start discovering their own communities. And in doing so, become invested in it. And through that investment, discover their purpose.
Yeah, and the way you detail this in the book, you kind of take us through the history of Microsoft's corporate giving program. And a lot of it is the company saying to individual Microsoft employees, your wife was an early one, you later on joined the company, but saying to those employees, you can give to whatever cause you want to give to, and we will match that. I think it started at, you say, at $10,000, and it went to 12, and then ultimately now it's $15,000 in annual matched giving, which across a business of this scale with this many employees adds up to quite a bit. And the total giving now is over $2 billion in the history of the company, you say in the book. So that's the way they have kind of implemented. And you're I guess what I'm taking away from your initial comments here is that this allowed individuals who work at the company to have that question for themselves. What is my purpose? What do I care about? What am I connected to? I don't want to lose this opportunity to take the corporate money and give it along with my own, but I need to then question, where can I make the most impact? Is this sort of how you think it's evolved
Exactly.
there in the company?
Yeah, exactly. And Bill Gates and Bill Newcomb in 1985 very quickly realized that, look, here are these 20-something that are working 18, 20 hours a day on their work. But eventually they will become part of the community. They will grow up here. They will get married here. They will have kids here. And if we don't give them the opportunity to discover the community, then who will? We'll just become a separate island in Seattle.
Which is a lot of really what, when you think of the critiques of the tech sector, and a lot of this is down in Silicon Valley, San Francisco, but the idea that you've got, massive and rising homelessness right alongside very expensive property and these incredible campuses that are sort of secluded, and employees going to work in these Wi-Fi enabled buses, right? This idea that we've built enormous wealth and innovation in the tech sector, but that it's separated out. And it sounds like your argument, and I've seen it, through the book, is that Microsoft kind of took a different approach by embedding this very early in the corporate culture.
Yes, it did. It did, but it did not stop from Microsoft having their own. Microsoft was, by the way, the first company that actually had its Wi-Fi enabled buses to transport people before any of the companies started it. But actually, Microsoft is now one of the largest owners, private bus fleet owners in the world as a company. And part of the reason they did that was to reduce traffic, because traffic was just becoming crazy. So I'm not sure that it has actually stopped the disparities, but what it has actually done is that it has got people engaged, right? So when Bill first started this, he was very disappointed because most people gave to their alma mater. I mean, you Harvard graduate, your wife is a Harvard graduate. And the first instance, okay, I've made a little money. Harvard is constantly sending you emails, donate, donate, donate. You write your first check. That's the easiest place to write. The company matches it. It took a while for people to actually say that there is something beyond a university asking you for money, to that there were other causes. And that started happening when people got married, people had kids, people had issues in life, whether it was, somebody's family got impacted. And then they started discovering that there was much more to do. What I do want to kind of emphasize that it is not that Microsoft chose to do it with a matching gifts program. Companies can do it in any format they want. It is really to, Raj, if you kind of take this a layer further, we are living in an incredibly divided world, right? And that divisions are getting polarized because of communities that we are forming, which are becoming impenetrable. So when you take Robert Putnam's argument of creating, bonding communities, clubs
City
and
of
all
social
kind of,
capital. He wrote the book, Bowling
Yeah.
Alone. Yep.
Right, bowling alone, right? So you basically he's saying, clubs and all kind of created a place for people to belong. But we belonged in only communities that we cared about. What employee volunteerism did was that it broke down that barriers for people to volunteer along people of different races, different creed, different political affiliations, and start building relationships, which allows you to form bridging networks. And that's where you first start learning this lesson of bridging, right? So even if you're working in a team in a company, you're actually working alongside your team. You're a particular group of programmers and there is a hierarchy. But when you go out and volunteer, a VP, Brad Smith, is picking up rubbish along with a new hire. And they get to chat and suddenly something happens, right? Mentorship opportunities happen, other kinds of conversations happen. And I think that's the more important part, right? That how do you create that environment in which we all learn how to bridge, which is not to say that we're not going to bond. You have your own community, I have my own community, and to a large part, that's where we will spend time. But Microsoft's ability to create this employee giving program allowed bridging to take place, where people really discovered, as I talk about in my book, that what they learned at Microsoft with this hyper competitive environment did not work in the nonprofit sector when they started going there and serving, and they had to completely relearn.
Right. They thought we need to win. How do you win? Right. And that's not how it necessarily works in this space, right?
And it's not about winning. It is about building a community that lasts. There are no winners or losers. So all of those shifts started happening. And what I discovered through that process of interviews, and I didn't come up with the name early on. I didn't have the name in my head. I had a very different name of the book. But as I wrote, I kind of started looking at what are some of the principles that are coming out of these individuals, whether it is Bill Gates or Jean-Philippe Courtois or Jeff Rakes or Nathan Myhrvold or even Tazeen Shahid, who's just left the company and just went to Bangladesh to start his own nonprofit, which he had started while he was at Microsoft.
And these are some of the most, for people who don't know, these are some of the most famous executives.
You're on mute.
I don't think so. Have we lost our connection? I hear you fine.
I think we lost your voice.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Well, you keep talking then. Maybe we can see if it comes back. I'm here clearly for me anyway.
So one of the things that I found is these 5 principles that I developed around purpose mindset, right? 1, discover your strengths and apply them. Don't focus on the problem you want to solve. And one of the stories I highlight is this couple that had, after many tries, had a baby boy was born and with a stroke. And the family spent the first 2 years trying to really help build the side of the body that had been impacted. Till they went and met a neurosurgeon that works with mirroring concepts and asked them to focus on the strength of the child and the side of the body that was strong, and that the weaker side will emulate it. So this notion of working from strengths is very important. Second, put a filter of abundance and not of scarcity. In the development world, we are always fighting for resources. But you can, with small resources, turn it into something big if you just keep focusing on it. Third, look at what you're doing in terms of its effectiveness and not about efficiency. And that is critical in the work that we are doing, right? How do we be effective instead of being efficient? Fourth, focus on being a movement and rather than building an organization. And especially in the development sector, what we are really trying to create is how do we get everybody to get engaged with us? Hadi Partovi started code.org with the idea of getting everybody to code, all the kids to learn how to do small amounts of coding, to create that critical thinking mind. And he got Bill Gates and Mark Zuckerberg and everybody else to do these videos to promote coding, till he found out that the only way kids were going to learn to code is because teachers were going to teach them. And he had to get teachers and an army of teachers to do this because it was their program and not Hadi Partovi's program. So it became a movement. And finally, how do we move on this path from going from being altruistic and generous to empathetic and compassionate? And if we did that, then I think we kind of move from that focus on the me to the focus on the we. And that purpose is basically just a way to replenish yourself. It's that renewable source of energy. It's a light switch, right? I mean, it's basically a light switch. You can decide you want to smile or you want to frown. And purpose is that ability to smile and say, I want to spread good.
I think the interesting areas that I'd like to get into include, what does this mean for companies that have moved sort of past CSR and into ESG as their core focus? What's the place for CSR? What's the place for employee giving programs in this new era that we're in now, with a focus on impact, investment, and ESG? And I'm also interested in what it means for global development professionals.
They're now, in my mind, becoming part of a continuum. Right? So when we first started off, it was all about corporate social responsibility. First of all, it's just about giving, right? Companies write a check, do good, get some publicity, and move on. Then you started getting this whole ESG movement come in separately, which was saying that there is more than just writing a check. It is actually about behavioral change and the operational change of a business as it impacts society. For a while, they kind of operated separately. But what has happened is that employees don't see this as two separate issues. They actually see it as one single issue. Are we as a company part of society and operating within the betterment of society? Or are we operating separately and just doing some things to make everybody feel good? And that process has got even more exacerbated. And McKinsey's study that just came out in April actually shows that if companies do not provide a space for employees to apply their purpose, they will walk out of the door. 84% of managers that were interviewed, senior managers, basically believe that the company has a purpose and they can fulfill their purpose in the company. 84% of rank and file employees believe the opposite. Right? That there is no purpose in the company and the company does not allow them to fulfill their purpose. So there is a gap. And I think what is required is to overcome that gap. Now, the Business Roundtable in August of 2019 kind of said that purpose is now part of that. Purpose and impact on society is part of what a company should do and not just as focus on shareholder value. But now the hard work starts of how to get employees engaged in a way where it is not seen as a separate piece, but that it is integrated.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. That's the way I would see it too. And I just asked a question on chat that hopefully you see, Akhtar.
That's the challenge, right? I mean, that is particularly the challenge. And I think companies are realizing it. Companies are realizing it because employees are realizing it. Customers are realizing it, right? Society is realizing it. We are now willing to hold feet to the fire of companies, even companies like Microsoft, right? Which has this very extensive program and process. They are also not devoid of criticism, right? When certain decisions get made, whether it is around should we be working on a particular effort or not, which is controversial, right? Employees voice their opinions on it. And the company has to be brave enough and mature enough to allow for those voices to be heard. Right? We all kind of saw this outpouring of letters that, we are with our BIPOC community, that we believe in diversity, we believe in, but what is happening with actual change? Are we actually changing the systems, right? Where is it showing up at the board level? Is it showing up at the leadership level? And these are all incredibly difficult tasks to do simply because change is hard and it cannot happen overnight. But what we are seeing now is employees and communities, making sure that companies are on that path. NGOs are a workplace. They're not devoid of any of these issues. Just because you work in an NGO doesn't mean that you don't carry the same behavior traits. We've seen that, right? I mean, this current challenge with World Vision, which they've been trying to grapple with, is just an example, or even some of the issues that we've seen at Oxfam. Because at the end of the day, humans are involved, right? So I think that even in the workplace within an NGO community, even if you can come back to the issue of purpose, just because we are working in a purposeful work doesn't necessarily mean that every time we are actually activating our purpose. You might be just doing finance for IMF or for an NGO, and you are really not seeing the impact of your work. So what is the organization doing to ensure that you are also part of that same impact that the person that is actually sitting in the middle of the village in Africa, distributing food sees? So we all face the same issue, right? Even in the NGO sector, I mean, you highlighted very well in your book, right, that there is this whole disparity of the leadership within the NGO sector, who's giving the money in the NGO sector. We know that issues of culture, decolonization are all issues that we all have to deal with in the international development sector. Many of what we do is run by highly privileged people, and community voices are never really heard.
I'm asking him a question now. I know he can't hear about, are companies doing enough given the scale of the challenge? What about taxes? I mean, shouldn't companies just pay more in taxes? In Seattle, we've got companies like Amazon that have been criticized for paying so little. Where do tax fit in with this is what I'm asking him.
I think it's a great argument, right? That should companies be paying more taxes? But let's just say that company is paying more taxes. But in this country, it's never going to be at a level where it is in some of the European countries. I should say, even if you increase, this issue of personal responsibility, personal ability to contribute, personal generosity is not going to go away. Right? Because that's who we are as an American society. Altruism is part of humanity. I mean, it's not just society. Everywhere, zakat is going to happen, right? So, but the question is, how are you doing it, right? So even companies like Microsoft, so when I joined the company, I kind of looked at it and said, what is the strength of a company? Right? So company has 4 strengths. It has a product, which is its acumen, which it can bring to the fore. It has people. People have time, treasure, and talent. Company has its own resources, whether it's in money or other resources that it can bring. And 4, it can do advocacy. It can advocate for an issue. Now, if it did all of that in partnership with the development community, now you start seeing massive change happen. Right? A company like Microsoft or a Google can work with Devex, for example, and say, look, here are some of the major issues that we are facing. And if Microsoft took that on and said, here are one of the issues we want to amplify, the voice becomes much larger. But it's also now got support from the community for that voice. So that's what we did, right? So when I came in, Microsoft was the hated company in the world, right? It was like the evil empire. When I went up to my first conference, I mean, I was basically said, our friend Akhtar Badshah has gone from the nonprofit sector to the evil empire. Now it's one of the most beloved companies. And part of that was because we kind of got people to understand in the company the value of the nonprofit sector, the development sector, its intelligence, its power, its respect, and that you had to work with them and listen to them and not tell them what to do. And I think if all did that, then it moves away from what you're just asking. How do we ensure that this isn't just reputation washing, right? For me, it was not about whether people like me or not. It was about, my job became, if I told no to somebody, would they hug me? Because I was not foo-fooing them, that I was actually genuinely interested in what they were doing, but our approach did not work with them. But I still understood what they did. I was still willing to help them, but it would be in a very different way. So marketing, which is why, marketing is great if you do it as an advocacy in the amplification of the community that you want to service. And then it comes back to you in spades. This is such a huge topic. And, Raj, you've covered it in your book in a very eloquent way also. But what I was trying to do was to more focus on the individual in this book. We all have the power in our own self to make this world a better place. We can do it by supporting a kid, by just mentoring them through school in this hard time. We can do that by making sure that a family is fed because they are in hard times. Or we can do it because we want to partner with a much larger initiative that is happening in India right now around the crisis that you and I are facing, Raj, with the COVID. But we can do it. We are in control. Nobody has to tell us to do this. So purpose is that ability where you're moving away from what I want to be to who I want to serve. And once you kind of get to that, then you actually start forming a different community, which I'm hoping that many of your listeners will join on my website at purpose.mindset.org, where I want to hear your stories. I want to hear from you as an individual. What have you done to make a difference? Because each of these people that I reflect in my book started off there. They started by just doing something. And then it kind of got traction. So if we can all just go out and put on that lens of change and making the world a better place, then whether you are white, black, brown, Republican, Democrat, Christian, Jewish, Muslim, Hindu, doesn't matter. So it's that light. Turn on that light within you.
It's an inspiring message and it's an inspiring book. And I have to say, you talked about the specific examples. I recommend it to people for those examples in part because you're going to see exactly how people were faced with this question, including some senior people at Microsoft, people who made a fortune there and had to decide, what do I do with my life? And how do I take these skills and actually do something that's beyond just careerism? And I think that is very applicable to all of us. The other thing I'd add is that, when we started Devex 20 years ago, we wouldn't have seen a company like Microsoft as part of global development. We would have seen it as a business. And then there's this development sector, which has nonprofits and it has USAID and the World Bank. And I think the circle around what counts as global development has really expanded. And the SDGs have partly done that. But companies that are giving away $2 billion over their lifetime, they're a big part of that. So this book is fascinating, and Akhtar's insights are fascinating. Even when we don't have our audio working perfectly, it's been great to talk to him because it is so important for all of us, I think, to understand where these enormous companies fit. And especially also in the future, maybe we'll get into this in a future discussion, but where their products even fit, especially technology products. But even you can think about the oil and gas industry and other sectors. Where does their actual core work fit into achieving these SDGs? So I really appreciate the time, even with the technical malfunctions here. and we're gonna do this again sometime soon. Good to see you, my friend Akhtar, and thanks to everyone for being here.